So he says, don't you know that the law is binding on a person only as long as he lives? For a married woman is bound by law to her husband while he lives. And this was in the old covenant, and it was vice versa. It's not just women. But she's bound to her husband while he lives. But if her husband dies, she is released from the law of marriage. Accordingly, she will be called an adulteress if she lives with another man while her husband is alive. But if her husband dies, she is free from that law. And if she marries another man, she is not an adulteress. First, as a side note, I'd just like to point out that this is not Paul's complete and final and authoritative teaching on divorce and remarriage, because he talks about it in 1 Corinthians. There's other places where we have references to that. So just turning to Romans chapter 7 and trying to use it as a tool in talking about divorce and remarriage, it's risky because there's a lot of other things to come into factor. Having said that, he makes the point. He says, look, don't you know that the law, it only applies to people that are alive? In this case, we're both the woman and the man in the example. Do you have a woman who's married to a man? If she were to leave and go live with another man or to have relations with another man, she is an adulteress by law, right? If her husband dies, then she is free to get remarried, right? She's no longer under the law of adultery any longer because her husband is dead. In his dying, she also died to that law. Does that make sense? That's the illustration that Paul is giving. So he's going to now apply it to us. Likewise, just like that, my brothers and sisters, you also have died to the law through the body of Christ, so that you may belong to another, to him who has been raised from the dead, in order that we may bear fruit for God. So again, now he says, just like that woman is free through the death of her husband, we are also free from the whole law through the death of Christ. Why? Because if the law could be applied to us and sin could be imputed to us, which one of us would raise our hand and say, I'm going to heaven? Hopefully none of us. God had to separate us from our sin. And in doing that, he had to separate us from the power of the law. Any law. We don't want to put laws on each other. Is it a good idea to come to church? Hopefully. You can judge that, I guess. But I think yes. But can going to church or keeping church attendance make you right with God? No. If we place these ideas on other people, are we helping them? No. We want to come alongside and say, hey, this is really funny. I remember this as a new believer. And I used to think it was a complete crock. It's not a have to. It's a get to. And I was like, I am not feeling that at all. This feels absolutely like a have to. If it feels like a have to, there's a couple possibilities, right? It could be that your church is genuinely garbage, and the people in it are garbage, and your pastor's garbage, and it's a giant waste of time. That is possible, isn't it? Or it could be that we're just not willing to adopt and listen to what's there. So if I go because I have to, if I show up here bitter like this is garbage, what's typically the rest of the morning going to be like? Pretty garbage. Is that going to be anybody's fault but our own? No, it's going to be our fault. How we go into something typically will dictate, at least in part, the outcome of it, right? So if I walk in the door and I go, you know what, these people are hypocrites, they don't care about me, they don't greet me enough, they don't offer me enough coffee, his sermons are just way too dang long, and this is going to be a complete waste of time. How's it going to turn out? Are you going to walk in and have a Holy Spirit zap and you're just come to the door never mind, this is the best place ever and all these people are the best? No. It's called hardening our hearts. It's amazing what we can reject by hardening our hearts. There's a reason why over and over, even in the Old Testament, you have things like taste and see that the Lord is good. The point is you have to stick it in your mouth. You have to taste. You have to figure it out. You have to experience it. Only a soft heart can experience the Lord. He honors you. And if you're going to be hard-hearted, sometimes he's merciful enough to bring brokenness and tragedy into your life. so that you're forced to face the reality of this world, and it causes us to draw near to him. Sometimes he allows that. And sometimes we just kind of go on in our hardness of heart. And he's calling you, and he's beckoning. We go, no, I'm not into it. My way is better. It's so much better. That's why I have to continually keep myself drunk, because my way is so much better. That's why I have to just watch like 4 hours of Netflix every night to deal with my life, because my life's so much better. It's just crazy the things we claim and then the way we live. So he's saying, look, we've been separated from the law. He's saying that it doesn't impute sin to us anymore. And he says, verse 4, we died to the law. We died to it through Christ. And then he says, but it's for a reason. It's so that we can be joined or belong to another. See, when we belong to him, when we're willing, all of a sudden the have to does get to be a get to. We are the only ones that decide if it's a have to or a get to. We're the only ones. Even if someone is forcing us to do something, in this case, come to church, we decide what it does for us at the end of the day. So he says, it's so that we can belong to another, to him who has been raised from the dead, in order that we may bear fruit for God. So he's saying, look, we have been separated from the law, separated from sin. We've died to all of it and its power, so that we can serve another. If the law applied to you, you could not serve God in the way he wants. You couldn't. You'd have to serve the law. And we all know that can't work. That's a failure. It brings wrath. It exposes sin. And in a moment here, we're going to see that it actually arouses or provokes sin in us. It's kind of interesting. And for this reason, to bear fruit. For while we were living in the flesh, our sinful passions, aroused by the law, were at work in our members to bear fruit for death. But now we are released from the law, having died to that which held us captive, so that we serve in the new way of the Spirit and not in the old way of the written code. So he says, look, we died to the law so that we could bear fruit to God. And he says, but when we were living in the flesh, or when we were still attached to our sinful nature, our sin nature, that's the point he's making. Not just like we as Christians, sometimes we say, well, you're living in the flesh. And what we mean is, right now, you're not listening to God. He's talking about while we in the past. He's using past tense right now. It's actually aorist, but he's saying, look, in the past you did these things, and in those things they were provoked by sinful passions. So we were in the flesh, living by passion, and those passions got aroused by the law, meaning that they were stoked by the law. The law actually made them even stronger. And they were at work, those passions were at work in our members, and they were bearing fruit for death. And it's funny because how the law works, doesn't it? Because when somebody says to us, you can't or you will, we're like, nah. Especially here in America. It's not so much in like if you go to like the EU and stuff like that, when the government just comes in and says, hey, you're doing this, they have a much different response. I know there's some riots and stuff like that in France, but it's on a way different level. Like here we are in our church, completely ignoring mandates, right? Probably shouldn't say that over the internet, but this is what's happening, right? Because it's America. Hopefully that's not why we're doing it. Hopefully we're doing it so we can sing and breathe and honor God and not some other reason like we're upholding the Constitution. Jesus was not American. I love the Constitution. I think it's great, but Jesus was not an American. He was Jewish. He never lived in America, right? He never supported the Constitution. Did he support life and liberty? Absolutely. He also said, render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and render to God what is God's. So I'm not trying to have like that political showdown or something like that. But it's funny that when it comes down, we're like, oh, you bring it, Jay Inslee. You just try that. It doesn't matter what it is. It's the proverbial old school wet paint sign. Even if you just think it, you're like, oh, I could touch it. I could touch it. Or if you see this, don't sit here, and you're like, hey, quick, get your cell phone out. Right next to the sign, right? It's weird how law brings out rebellion. It's just like this natural thing. Hey, you can't do that. Oh. No one tells me can't. So he says the law, not only does it bring wrath, not only can it not make a person righteous, it actually stokes inside us from our sinful nature that rebelliousness, that anger. Oh, you said I can't? Oh, watch me. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be like, I bet you can't eat that burger in 30 seconds. Oh, watch. It's weird. It rolls up in us. That's what he's saying. He says, but now we are released from the law, having died to that which held us captive. What held us captive? Sin held us captive through the law. We were captive by sin. We were slave to sin. But we've been set free from sin, and we've been set free from the law. The law is no longer applied to our lives, and sin is no longer applied to our lives. Yes, there's fruit that leads to death, but it's not applied, it's not imputed to us.